Welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man that will hopefully won't be snapping pencils while I talk about reanimating keeping their able to stay alive in their brains for 6 to 12 minutes. It's John Levingood.
Oh, not many people use pencils anymore in classes, and there's a good reason. It's to avoid snarky pencil breaks. To distract teachers rudely.
You said for 12 minutes. 6 to 12 minutes. It's, oh man. West is the worst student. I mean, geez Louise, imagine having Herbert West in your class, John. So, you start teaching, you're in a college, you could teach right now, you could go get a job at a university, and Herbert West shows up, snapping pencils. What would you do?
Well, that's rough. Like, of course, this is 1985, man. Like, this is an era where students had no power, and the word of faculty was taken like the word of a deity to a follower. So really, if Dr. Hill wants to make his life hell, he can.
Yeah.
And we saw in this movie, and of course I laughed when it happened, because obviously Dean Halsey isn't in charge of the financial office of the college. But, when he's talking to Dan Kane, our co-star, our assistant, if you will, to Herbert West, and he's saying, and of course your loan will be revoked. Right. But this is the kind of stuff that when you think back to your like National Lampoon's Animal House era, your Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where a teacher shows up to your house and keeps you from going to prom on time. Remember the history teacher was Spicoli?
Yeah.
Like,
Mr.
these are
Hand.
things that were just commonplace when you think about them back then. And if a teacher shows up at your house, or if a college professor says something, your parents or you're just going along with it because you can't fight. Whereas now, you'd be like, get out of my house. You're harassing me.
Yeah.
I'm going to complain.
They're not going to breakfast
totally
club
the
you.
opposite.
2 weeks. 3 weeks. Stop.
Right.
4 weeks.
Right.
You get the ball.
So it's funny that, see, like Dr. Hill, though, he seems to not really be scared by Herbert West. He's just like incensed by him. Can't wait to see you in class, Dr. West. I think we know that he thinks he's going to fail him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how West performs on an exam. He's just going to fail him.
Because they had the power right then. Dr. Carl Hill.
I think so, right? And that has nothing to do with how just disgusting the Dr. Hill character is, with his very lascivious interest in Megan,
Woo-wee.
played by Barbara Crampton,
Yep.
who's Dean Halsey's daughter. Like,
You want to hear a funny story that I heard from the commentary and behind the scenes notes?
Yeah.
So David Gale was in the theater, and he plays Dr.
That's
Carl
Dr. Hill. Right?
And there's a scene where we're jumping to the end. You've seen Re-Animator. Stuart Gordon directed it, 1985, based on a short story, Herbert West, Re-Animator. Now, David Gale is in the theater, and there's a scene where his body is holding his decapitated head, and his body is licking a naked Megan Halsey, Barbara Crampton. I mean, they really linger on the camera. And then there's a scene.
Her breast.
I don't even know if I want to talk about this one scene, but his wife got up and yelled at him during the screening, like, "How dare you? How could you?" And then he got divorced.
Did he really?
Yeah. But think about it, man. You go to a movie premiere, John. You are David Gale, or you are John Levingood playing Dr. Carl Hill in a remake in 1985, and you haven't told your wife about this scene. Packed theater, friends and family, and then there's that. Like,
he is straight up sucking her nipple on that.
Yeah, it's not. And I mean, listen, Stuart Gordon, they did that on purpose. Like, they really wanted to push the limits. I mean, this movie got an X rating. Like, they didn't even try for an R rating on this movie. Mac Ahlberg, wonderful cinematographer. They just said, okay, we are going to leave the camera lingering. But this guy got divorced because of this movie, because his wife was like, "You suck." Like, that's not acting. That is not acting. That isn't like a Hallmark Christmas movie kiss. Like, that is. I don't want to go too far into detail, but that's some like extreme. You didn't have to go that far, and then she divorced him.
Yeah, so I totally understand his now ex-wife's reaction. At the same time, I do find some kind of personal. There's something pleasant to me about these deliciously revolting, is almost the word I'd use, movies where it seems like nothing is off limits, and they seem to treat that just as equally with men and women in a way, because we have
she's far more sexualized. The men are just kind of zombies running around.
Yes, the
like
sexualization
that's not,
is aimed at women, but we see more penises in this movie than we do pairs of breasts.
You know, the DP fell apart a little bit during this because they knew if they filmed too many of those, it would be labeled as a porn movie, and they couldn't even get like a no rating. And so Mac, I guess, was on stage and he was really sort of bummed out. And I guess during this time, someone walked up to him and like, Mac, like, are you doing okay? Like, how you doing? And he's a German cinematographer. And I guess he started saying, what did he start saying? He was like, he was really depressed and he was just, oh gosh. Oh, he said that there's too many weenies wiggling and he's really stressful about how to keep them out of frame.
And they're very unflattering to the act because, you know, you're just
I just
a naked guy in a cold room.
I just love though that this all right. So this guy worked on Innocent Blood, Robot Jox, Arena, Deep Star 6, House, Ghoulies, Deadly, big movies. So this guy Mac, he knew how to shoot. He was an excellent cameraman. But I just love that he was just sitting there needing like a cigarette and a cheap blended scotch. Just like, how do I get all? Like, I can't do a German accent. I just sounded like I was from like a Chicago movie from 1930s. Like, hey, how do I get it? Like he's he didn't know how to get all those out of frame. It's just funny. Like that was a story about Re-Animator. And I just want to say, John, before I forget, this was Stuart Gordon's first movie. He worked in Chicago.
Is it producer?
Yeah, no, director. He worked in.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Brian Usna was the producer. My bad.
He was a playwright. He worked in Chicago. He was a playwright, and he got convinced he wanted to turn Re-Animator into a series. Oh, stage play. Then he wanted to turn Re-Animator into a pilot. And eventually somebody walked up to him, and I read this interview with him, and he was talking about horror. And he's like, horror, you can make horror for cheap. You can get it done fast. You get a lot of experience. If it's not that bad, people don't care. They shot it in 18 days. And he goes, a friend of his suggested he make a horror film, explaining that it was the easiest thing to raise money for, and the easiest way for investors to get their money back, no matter how terribly it turned out. This movie, though, you watch Sam Raimi. He had directed movies before Evil Dead. You have watched a lot of these directors coming up. I think this is like Saw. Like you watch these first horror films from some of these directors, and this is a very first horror film because the guy, like you said, there's like a naivety to it. There is a full of life. They went over the top. They weren't worried about like an NC-17 rating. It seems like just like a guy who was just brimming with ideas, coming out to LA, shooting a first time picture. He didn't quite know what was going on. Like, what's this light? Why am I doing this? What's this set? Like he understood stagecraft and set builds on stage. But yeah, this is a movie where I just think it comes from a first time director. You don't see many movies like this from fifth time directors. This, you know what I mean? Like this is this has so much personality and charm that I think it just comes from just a guy who wasn't tired, went out to Hollywood with something to prove, and shot this picture.
I mean, you know that a studio had 0% involvement. I mean, the nothing off limits. It goes to the effects too. It goes to. I mean, the most horrifying thing in this movie for me was when Dr. Hill's intestines explode out of his body, and they don't just wrap around Herbert West. They don't just constrict him or pull him away or keep him in this room where this acid gas is creating, probably a little death chamber. Before any of that happens, it's actually smothering him. It is suffocating him.
It's Sarlacc pits him. You know how it wraps around that guy's leg?
But he's trying to pull it away from his face, and you see the panic. Like it's trying to kill him just that way. Like, and to me, that's a weird idea to have. That's a horrifying idea to have. Like, to me, that if you had any studio involvement, they'd be like, whoa, it just wraps around him and pulls him, towards the body.
Wait,
right?
What?
Because that was just, in a way, it's psychologically brutal to me, just the thought of it. Like, this movie is pretty serious. There's so much going on in this movie, and it's a really I think it's a really appropriate way to kick off kind of our little Lovecraft series here, which was kind of springboarded off of the Apocalypse trilogy that we
Yeah,
completed.
Dagon and Color Out of Space, because we wanted to talk about Nicolas Cage, and then
Hmm.
you've been talking about Dagon and Re-Animator for a long time for the show. I mean, you've brought it up
Sure.
many times since 2015. So I got let's just package a deal together because we've done Final Destination, we've done oh geez Louise, Resident Evil,
Yeah.
we've done racing. We did a racing. We just like series, John. Like
Like
we
the
just
race
like doing
series.
yeah the race
Well,
series. Now we're on
this
this.
was the natural progression though, because when we did the thing for our Kurt Russell 250 episode, right? Then we did 358, we did Prince of Darkness, and then we rounded it out with In the Mouth of Madness for 369. We did that Apocalypse trilogy for John Carpenter, and all those movies in very different ways address very different overt Lovecraftian themes. Maybe the least or the most subtly in Prince of Darkness, but still an overt theme. It's just
Mhm.
not as in your face, if you will. So very different ways. And so now, we just continue it with things that are very more directly Lovecraftian, right? Obviously, Herbert West Re-Animator. And this is way more bonkers than any of that Apocalypse trilogy stuff. Like this movie's full tilt. We're watching this, Mark, a week and a half ago, and I loved your reaction to it of how they are not acknowledging the comedy that is very obvious on the screen ever, but it manages to work.
Yeah, I mean everyone's playing it so straight. I mean, I think Jeffrey Combs rightfully gets a lot of love for his portrayal of Herbert West.
It's
Everyone knows
amazing.
about Barbara Crampton, Megan Halsey. She's so good. I like that spin move she does in the hallway. That's like there's a lot of little character moments in this, but I think Dean Halsey, Robert Sampson, he plays the Dean, and then he goes to Crazy Papa, Crazy Zombie, and then you have David Gale, who goes from being this kind of lecherous jerk doctor to being a decapitated head being carried around a body who can't use the word T in his sentences. Like it's very interesting the way he talks. But then they're all playing it so straight. But you have a cat that looks, uh, purpose. They purposely did this. I mean, I was looking at the people who did the visual effects in this movie.
That's the cat they would have used in the stage play version.
Exactly. And like I was looking at the people who worked on this, and you have let's see, you have John Navlin. He did like Critters, Splash, Deadly Blessing. Then when you have what John Carl Buechler, he worked on Tammy and the T Rex, Nightmare on Elm Street. He worked on Carnosaur, Friday the 13th, Ghoulies, Halloween 4. You have a kind of who's who of special effects artists in this movie, and you can tell. I mean, from the opening eye squish to the scene where Halsey is taking, Carl Hill is taking the brain off of the character. They found a bald man, put a bald cap on him, took the top off, and then they brought in a dummy. They had cattle brain because a guy got a lot of stuff from like a local butcher. Then they had cattle brain in there to mess around with. So you have a tiny budget. This was like 9 million to they say either like 2 million based that they're not quite sure how much it cost. But you have like when he throws that cat, no, yeah, he throws a cat at the wall and it leaves a blood stain on the wall. And then there's another head thrown at a wall later and it's just hamburger and explodes into the wall. It just seems like the special effects crew were having the best time of their lives on this movie. And I know I went totally off, whatever. We're talking about our trilogy that we're going into. But I just want to, John, this movie was made in '85 and it's still considered to be, and it's a cult classic and many people adore it. Uh, Notwithstanding, I don't even want to talk about it, but like Lovecraft, all that baggage that comes with him, lots of baggage. But notwithstanding, like, I think this movie, it's such a weird, it has so much character. It has this charming sense of humor. You don't know many of the actors, like, and then I don't know. And there's blood and guts and uh, nudity